I introduced you guys to macroeconomics, and then we discussed the four concerns of our macroeconomy, or we call them the health indicators of our macroeconomy. We have the output growth, inflation, unemployment, and the balance of payment. Now, nana ko yung story gamay because I read this article. And then experts and economists are very worried of what is happening right now in our economy. Because if you have noticed, so given sa mga data you present last week, so as you know, our GDP is declining, though increasing but still at negative, diba? GDP. And then ang atong unemployment rate is also decreasing. All right, now if there is a decrease in GDP as well as an increase in unemployment rate, in economics we call this stagnation, meaning there's a decline in economic growth and on unemployment rate or increase in unemployment rate. Hindi ka ba naman spelling? Isa. Ano siya? Basta stagnation. Stagnation. Now, katamo ko na article ako nabasa. Came out after the government reported an increase in inflation. So now imagine a decrease in GDP plus dapat increase na siya, sorry. An increase in unemployment rate plus there's another increase in inflation rate. Now economists and experts are worried because the Philippine economy might be undergoing stagflation. So stagflation occur, it's another economic term. Stagflation occur if there's a stagnation and high inflation rate happen at the same time. So this is a very rare na gani very kaya nga scenario in an economy. This is also uncommon because if a nation is experiencing or an economy experiencing stagnation, meaning the economic growth or the economy itself is weak, it's rare that the inflation rate will increase because wala na may kagasto ang government and the people. So this is a very rare occurrence, and experts and economists are very worried that we are now in a stagflation state. So last week I discussed different types of inflation. We have inflation, we have deflation, and hyperinflation. So stagflation is a combination of stagnation plus high inflation rate. Now, if we encounter or if we are in a stagflation phenomena, it's unlikely for our policy to battle this kind of economic disturbance. Now, one expert say there that stagflation is still far, or our economy is still far from stagflation. Why? Because our inflation rate is still single digit. So mag-worry na daw ta for stagflation if double digit na ang inflation rate. Now, the government at this point in time should make an immediate action so we can avoid our economy from reaching stagflation. Now, muna itong i-discuss today, the role of the government in our macroeconomy. So the government plays a major role, obviously, and the government uses different policies in helping our macroeconomy. And these are the fiscal policy and the monetary policy. These are the modules, by the way, you took last week. So when we say fiscal policy, it pertains to taxes and spending. So later I'll be discussing this. And then monetary policy, this is manned by the central bank or the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, BSP, Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, in controlling the money supply or the money circulation in the market. Okay, first, fiscal policy. So fiscal policy concerns the changes in the level of the government spending and taxation. So this will help boost or slow down our economy depende sa tuang objective. Okay, so fiscal policy is not yet popular before until nahitabo ang Great Depression. So if you can remember itong Great Depression itong 1930s, the classical economists, they believe that, again, market is self-regulating. Kung magkasakit ang economy or ang market, it will heal itself. But then again, sa scenario sa Great Depression, after several years, unemployment rate is still increasing. Walay nahitabo. It means that the market can no longer heal. So one popular economist, si John Maynard Keynes, suggested that the government should step in, okay, in helping recover the economy from this phenomena. So ang suggest ni Maynard Keynes that the government should spend more to stimulate aggregate demand. Take siya si John Maynard Keynes. And then from there, it stemmed na kaning fiscal policy, or we call it the Keynesian policy or Keynesian economics, or also called as mixed economy, na nanay involvement ang government. Alright, the government can impose fiscal policy but cannot control the aspect when it comes to spending and taxation. So the government can control the tax rate because we have a progressive tax man karon depending on your income. So if you are earning 100,000, your tax rate is different if you are earning 500,000. However, the government cannot control the tax revenue, the amount that they can get from taxing individuals. Why? Because there are organizations that are not paying tax. There are sectors in the economy that's also not paying tax. For example, it's kind of e-commerce or online selling. The government is still having a hard time imposing tax to those businesses due to the platform. And also, kaning government spending will depend yun siya kung kinsa ang nakalingkod. Let's say, karon sa administration ni Duterte, he focuses on Build program. So let's say 2022, lahi na ang president, and then lahi na po ang priority sa health na po siya. So katong mga budget for Build is malahi na po, mabalhin na po dito sa health. So government spending will also depend kung kinsang nakalingkod. So fiscal policy cannot control it. Okay, mulahin na po ang decision maker. Alright, different types of fiscal policy. By the way, if you have any questions, just type it in on the chat box. Hinay akong tingog. Wait, sanay nagka-feedback. Ay, nag-on of mic. Madungog ko. Chat daw. Kimberly may nagka-feedback. Okay, klaro na no? Naman nagka-feedback sa kuwang headset ba? Check na kung na pinag-unog mic. Wala man. Okay. Alright, going back. So we have two types of fiscal policy that is being used by the government. The first is the expansionary fiscal policy. So here, the government will increase its spending or it will decrease the tax revenue. Pwede po gamiton niya ang duha. So increase in government spending, a decrease in tax revenue, or a combination of two. Now, if the government will follow expansionary fiscal policy or will impose this type of fiscal policy, it is expected that there's a boost in our economic activity. Why is that so? Again, if the government will spend into something, let's say infrastructure will create more employment. More employment means income. If you have an income, it will trigger demand. Then the demand will trigger supply. Supply will trigger production. Production needs more people. Like like a single cent spent by the government will have a large impact in our aggregate output. Right? So we call this the multiplier effect. Okay, so at this time na we are experiencing recession, the government is doing an expansionary fiscal policy. Why I say so? If you can recall, natay Bayanihan 1, natay Bayanihan 2, and then right now na po i-propose ang Congress kaning Bayanihan 3. I'm not sure if kung na-approve na ba ito, kaya marag-debatihan pa man ito nila. So that Bayanihan Act will let the government spend more. Like example nilang ibuhat kaning SAP or Social Amelioration Program. It's a type of a transfer payment, meaning a money that is given directly to the citizen without anything in return. So wala sila gipangayo nga like maybe trabaho or something. So in that way, it will stimulate demand and then it will boost economic growth or activity in the economy. So that's how expansionary fiscal policy works. However, if our economy will experience high inflation, then the best policy to impose or fiscal policy to impose is the contractionary fiscal policy. Now here, the government will decrease its spending or increase the tax revenue or a combination of the two. So mo tong concern kay mga experts and economists if we have or if we experience stagflation because we really don't know which exact policy to use. So imagine a decline in our GDP, a high unemployment, and a high inflation. So it's unlikely daw, based sila ang comment, it's unlikely for any of these two to use kung maka-experience stagflation. So mo ng hadlock. Alright, now since fiscal policy concerns about spending and revenue, of course when you say spending, magbase ta diya sa tong national budget. So this is the plan for the government on what to spend and asa mangita og sources of income for a specified period. So if our government expenditure is equal to our tax revenue, we can say that we have a budget balance, but this is a rare occurrence. I'm not really sure for other economies, but for the Philippines, marag dili kita ma-budget balance, no? It is always budget deficit, where government expenditure is greater than our tax revenue. I'll show you that later. Then government expenditure is less than tax revenue. Then we also have a budget surplus, which is a rare gihapon sa case sa Philippine economy. Alright, now dito sa facts. Now for fiscal year 2021, by the way, fiscal year is different from calendar year. So when we say fiscal year, it can start any month or any time of the year. Depende sa unsa giset sa organization. Now when we say calendar year, it's always start in January. Now PRRD, or President Duterte signed a 4.5 trillion national budget for fiscal year 2021. So this is in line with our battle of the COVID-19 pandemic with the theme Reset, Rebound, and Recover, investing for resiliency and sustainability. Okay, so the 4.5 trillion is equivalent to 21.8 of our national output. And one of the largest portion of this budget will go to social sector. If we look into by sector, social service sector will have 37% of the budget. That equates to 1,668 billion. Next is the economic services sector, where nadiya itong BBB program or Build program, which 29.4%. And then the rest will go to general public services, 16.6%. Debt burden, take note of this, debt burden, meaning mo na itong bayaran na utang. And then national defense, 4.6%. So this data came from the Department of Budget and Management. Now if we look into by department, the largest portion of the budget will go to the education with 16.7%. Now it's part of the constitution that the education should be prioritized in the budgeting of the national government. So manang always gives siya sa first. Next is ang DPWH, 15.4%, DILG, 5.5%, then DOH. Now DOH here, na-increase silang budget compared to the 2020, na 19.6%. Again, since DOH is the frontliner in line with gihapon is our COVID-19 pandemic na program. Then the rest, Department of National Defense, DSWD, DOTR, Department of Agriculture, Judiciary, and then DOLE. Again, data came from Department of Budget and Management. Alright, of course, kung natay budget, dapat tayo source sa income. So one of the sources of our national income is tax revenue. Now, as per the Department of Finance, the BIR or Bureau of Internal Revenue collected 1.94 trillion in total taxes last year. Now, the collection that they got exceeds their goal for 2020. Now, their goal has been revised since the pandemic affected businesses and individuals. So, ilang gilower ilang goal to 1.6 trillion. And with that, na-exceed nila and they got 1.94 trillion. Now, if you compare the collection, balik ta sa ato ang budget, obviously, 4.5 trillion na budget to 1.9 collection, then we can say we are at deficit. Okay? Okay, again, the decrease in the BIR collection compared to the previous year was understandable. There are a lot of businesses that's been closed, and then a lot of employment nga na misplaced or nga wala sa trabaho. So expected na sa BIR na mogamay lahang collection. And then, though ning sikat ning e-commerce or online selling, the government is having a hard time collecting taxes. to those businesses. All right, now how do we suffice those deficit? So the government normally borrows money from foreign economies or other organizations into local commercial banks. Now, as of November of 2020, the national government recorded a 10.13 trillion peso na utang. Though this is cumulative, meaning nagpatong-patong na rin siya from different administrations. Napagod sila yung joke na kung karon kag gipanganak na nakay 90,000 na utang na dapat bayaran. If you look into the national debt per capita. So 10.13 trillion ang atong utang right now. But don't you worry, makautang paghihapon tag daghan kaayo. Now, mga foreign economies and foreign organizations look into this debt to GDP ratio kung magpautang pa ba sila or dili sa Philippines. As of 2020 or December 2020, the debt to GDP ratio of the Philippines is at 54.5%. So pasok pa ta sa banga. Because based sa mga experts, it is worrying na if our debt to GDP is at 70%. Now, this debt to GDP is the ability of the economy to pay its debt. So, pag 70% na itong debt to GDP ratio, most likely, other countries, the World Bank, kaning IMF, and even local banks, dili na magpautang sa government sa Philippines. Because high ratio means the country is not producing enough to pay off its debt. And then if we have a low ratio, it means that we have plenty of economic output to make the payments. Alright, so ay na magkatingala kung ganun sige pagpangutang si Duterte. Kaya habang kaya pa, wala pa nasagad, utang lang ng utang. Okay, so borrowing money creates a national debt, obviously, but debt is not the same as deficit. But again, the cost of our deficit is sometimes kidakan tagutang because of debt. If you can remember, for 2020 budget, ang atong bayaran sa utang is 560.2 billion pesos or 12.4%. So imagine this amount here, we can use it to other things like sa vaccine ba diha, or sa infrastructure, or sa agriculture, daghan pa siyang mahitabo. So that's one of the problem that arises when we have high debt. Because atong ginabayad can be used to other things. It is an opportunity cost. And then national debt can also create crowding out effect. So this crowding out effect, it means that it creates competition for other businesses, and then private businesses will no longer interested in investing. So ano ni siya? Let's say the Philippine government will borrow money sa mga local banks, mga local commercial banks. Now if the government will loan or borrow millions, it will trigger high interest rate. So pagtaas ang interest rate, mga private companies or private businesses will not be encouraged to create or make a loan for investment because cost for borrowing is higher compared to silang return for investing. So we call that the crowding out effect. Alright, so that's it for fiscal policy. So remember that data so you will be aware sa nahitabo ko sa Philippines. Okay, next is monetary policy. So monetary policy is controlled by the central bank, though central bank is still part of the government. So they control the money supply to help either boost or slow down our economy. So BSP uses three tools For monetary policy, we have the open market operations, the discount rate changes, and reserve requirements. So what are these tools? So first is open market operation. So the government also sells and buy bonds. So bonds, mura ni sila mga contract, lending contract. But the difference is, ang government ang manghiram. And then, ang government ang muhimo sa contract, sila pag yun ang muhiram. And then, the government will set the interest rate kung pila ang ilahang bayaran. So let's say the government bonds is 100,000. So manghiram ang government sa mga 100,000. They will give you the contract and then stated there on the contract on pila ang interest na ilahang bayaran for a specific time period. Let's say 5 years, 10 years. So central bank can either purchase or sell securities. Okay, so selling bonds takes money out of circulation, then buying bonds puts money back into circulation. So this is how it works. So if the BSP or central bank will sell bonds, okay, it will decrease the money supply. So again, if you have 100,000, instead of your 100,000 circulating in the economy, hiramon sa government. So that 100,000 will be taken out sa economy that will trigger a decrease in money supply. So buying bonds is the other way around. The government will buy bonds, mga corporate bonds, private firms, mga bonds. It will then trigger an increase in money supply because the government will put out money in the economy. Then, in return, the money supply or the money circulation will grow. Okay, another tool is the discount rate changes. So a central bank can influence interest rate by changing the discount rate. So discount rate, so muna silang ginahatag na rate sa central bank sa mga commercial banks for short-term loans. So interest rates are determined depending on the supply and demand of money. Alright, so si BSP ang nagaset yapon ana. So ang buhatan sa mga commercial banks, so kung unsa tong interest rate nag-set sa central bank, i-follow lang to sa commercial bank. So let's say the discount rate or interest rate of BSP is 2%, and then the banks will charge sa ilang mga depositor or mga borrowers 3% lang ang interest. Alright, so how it can affect our economy or the money supply of our economy. So if the discount rate will increase, the money supply will decrease. How so? So let's say taas ang interest rate karon, which is set by the central bank, and then i-follow lang po sa commercial bank. So since taas ang interest rate, then borrowers will be discouraged to loan money from the commercial bank. So pag walay loan, meaning wala pa kayo investment. So pag walay investment, walay kwarta rotate or naga-circulate sa economy. But if the BSP will lower its interest rate or discount rate, the money supply will increase. So right now, ang gibuhat sa BSP, silang monetary policy is they already decreased the discount rate or interest rate. So it can trigger an increase in money supply. Okay, last tool for monetary policy is the reserve requirement, where percentage of all deposits that a bank must keep in their vaults. So let's say there's a commercial bank like BDO or BPI, and then they have 100,000 money from their depositors. So kanang 100,000 ana, a percentage of that will be put as deposit or reserve sa central bank. So kaning reserve percentage is set by the BSP. So let's say 10% to 100,000 So 10,000 ana maadto sa reserve, and then ang 90,000 mo na siyang gamiton sa bank. It's either for investment or for borrowing. So how will reserve requirements affect the money supply? So if the reserve requirements is high, let's say from 10% to 20%, so the money supply will decrease. So let's say 100,000 and then 20% ang reserve requirement. So 20,000 ato maadto sa central bank as a reserve or deposit, then 80,000 ra ang mag-circulate sa economy. But what the BSP did during the pandemic is ilahang ibabaan ang reserve requirements. So again, it can trigger an increase in money supply. Alright, so what is the best monetary policy during the recession? So if we encounter recession, we have to increase our money supply. In what way? We have to decrease the reserve requirement, decrease in discount rate, and the government should buy bonds. Now, these three here, gihimo na ni siya sa Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. But unfortunately, so ba siya? I cannot say it's not working, but it is not enough since our economic growth is very slow kumanggod. Now we call this an easy money policy kaning a process. But let's say if our economy experience inflation, so the government should decrease its spending and then decrease the money supply. In what way? So for monetary policy during inflation, the BSP should increase the reserve requirements, increase the discount rate, and sell bonds to take out money in the economy. And we call this the tight money policy. Alright, so what is the best monetary policy to use? If our aim is to increase money supply, which is during the recession like what we are experiencing right now, it is best to follow an expansionary monetary policy. So it lowers unemployment and it stimulates business activities and consumer spending. Since again, we are now in stagnation, high unemployment rate, and then low GDP. So expansionary monetary policy is the best option. But if we are experiencing high inflation, then it is the best to use contractionary so we can decrease the money supply. Okay? So mo na siyang ginakadlokan karon if we have stagflation. Going back to stagflation, high inflation, high unemployment, low GDP. So still, we are not sure which type of monetary policy will work. So the government should study this further and the BSP should be able to control inflation rate. Nga dili siya mo double digit, nga masabay sa stagnation. Because if that will happen, then most probably the recovery of the Philippine economy is L-shaped. Meaning it goes down and then it will no longer go back up. So mga na ginastudihan karon sa atuang government and economic managers. Alright, so that's it for the role of the government using